Hello, and welcome to the Parent Survival Kit podcast from Surviving to Thriving in Your Household. My name is Sonia Schwalen, and with me, as always, is my beautiful bride, Dr. Sonia Schwalen, pediatric expert psychologist, nationally certified school psychologist, and we also have, returning once again, we're so excited, Dr. Ericka Cooper is joining us today again. Last week we spoke about diagnosing delinquents, and today we're talking about delinquent
education.
DAEP. Delinquent Alternative Education Program. No, actually, it's not delinquent. It's actually disciplinary.
Yes.
This is kind of a big topic, too. As a coach, I've actually had kids that I know from the high school team that actually got involved in some things at school, and they had to go to alternative school. And, it was a big deal for them athletically. It also affected them moving forward because some of the other kids they were with in alternative school also kind of was a really bad influence for them as well. So it led to other things, I believe, just some things you see. So what is DAEP? How do we get there? How do our kids get there? And what do parents do? Lots of questions.
Yeah, lots of questions. So I can speak to what DAEP is, and then actually Dr. Cooper is going to speak to it in terms of a different version, I guess.
In a different setting.
Okay.
Which is called?
The Juvenile Justice Alternative Education Program.
The
JJAEP.
JJAEP, or JJ as we call it.
So Disciplinary Alternative Education Program. And
Alternative school.
You actually thought it was auxiliary school, right?
I just had the A's mixed up.
Oh, alternative school. So you got the A correct then? It's alternative.
Yeah.
Alternative school. So I actually did internship at an alternative school, and while I was there, I was actually able to provide many services to the kids that were attending school there. Essentially, kids are sentenced, I guess, or given like a time period in which they have to attend the alternative school. So they are no longer able to go to the regular campus wherever they attend for a certain time period. Usually it's like 30 days or something along those lines. It can be shorter, it can be longer. It can also get extended, just depending on what their behavior is like during their stay at the alternative program.
It's like probation.
Kind of,
You have to
exactly.
pass certain things. And
Yep. And they have to just demonstrate that they're working the program and going through pretty much the motions and having good success with that. And then they're able to get back to their regular campus. But while they're in the alternative program, they have a little bit more access to services from a psychological perspective. So there's absolutely going to be school psychologists or LSSPs in the state of Texas who are working with those kids one-on-one. When I was there, I used to run groups, so I would meet with kids in group therapy settings and just provide like education on drug use and other choices that kids might make and what are some of the consequences of certain choices, and just providing a lot of education, but also opening up a safe space for kids to be able to talk about what their experiences are and just receive some validation for those experiences and any emotions that they might be having. What were you going to say?
No, go ahead. Continue. I'm going to ask you here in a moment.
They also get access to different assessments. So if a behavior keeps popping up or some problematic thing keeps occurring for a kiddo, a judge may request that the child get an assessment, or parents may request that the child get an assessment, so the LSSP or the school psychologist in that setting is able to do the assessment while the kid is there. And it's a little easier to actually do an assessment while a kid's in the alternative placement just because their days look a little different. So even though they're still getting their core education and making sure that they're not falling behind with academics, they have a little bit more flexibility in their schedule. So some of their time may be spent doing some kind of like service project or with more of like a study hall type of setting. So it's not as structured, but it's definitely very closely supervised in that setting. And because there's a little bit more room in their day, there is more time to pull them out without having to miss the core academics to do the assessments, to give them the group therapy, or even meet with them individually. What were you going to say? Do you remember?
Yeah, so you talked about the group setting too. So one question I had also is, we've talked about groups like couples doing like group therapy in the past, and it can be very, very positive because we could sit there in a room thinking about how terrible our marriage is, and then we see some other couple out there and we're like, oh my gosh, they're way worse than us, man. That's awesome. We're actually not so bad after all. or they're doing it, so it's not so bad that we're doing it too, right? So it's so it's not the end of the world. Is that potentially a message my kid could get in alternative school in that group setting with talking about drug use and all these things that come up that other kids could be talking about that maybe my kid wasn't exposed to or was against, and all of a sudden, well, these kids are doing it now. I mean, it's not so bad.
I mean, there's always a risk for peer influence, right? And I think I'll go back to some things that I've said on these episodes in the past is your child is going to hear about like facts of life one way or another. How do you want them to get that information? And so last week, Dr. Cooper really hit home on it's really all about the parent-child relationship and just talking to your child. And so if those concerns exist, it can be a very great opportunity to start having those conversations with your child and start helping them or start even understanding how your child even thinks about these things and what is important to them or who they want to be when they grow up one day or what kind of person do they want to be in the world and what are their values and really work on some of that. And so absolutely there's risk for that, but there's also the potential that, and I saw it all the time when I would run groups in this setting is having an adult, so that would be me, right? The person influencing these kids, open up a discussion about, hey, this is what methamphetamines can do to you. Like, let's really talk about this. How many of you have had experiences like this, or what is that like for you in your day-to-day, just like life experience? And they're able to really just like open up about those experiences and not be judged for that, but actually guided in learning how to think critically and make their own decisions for what is the best for them is so empowering for some of these kids. And so I actually was very rewarded by that work because I got to see these kids finally get a space to just openly talk about some of those things that were a reality in their life that they may not necessarily be able to talk to any adult about.
Yeah, that makes sense. So not the this is your brain on drugs, any questions kind of campaign, but do you remember
a little bit of that.
Do you remember that campaign?
Yes.
The egg frying, the
fried
frying pan.
Yeah.
But it sounds like there was a lot of other things happening too.
Well,
a
it's
lot
better.
of relationship building,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, well, that's a big difference because as an adult, if you're telling me this is your brain on drugs, any questions, I'm like, I know everything already. You didn't teach me anything, really. That's not really true and accurate, so I don't believe you anyway. So that makes perfect sense. So what are some of the things that kids can actually be sent to alternative school for?
Go ahead, Dr. Cooper.
Sure. So really any kind of thing that they get into trouble for at school. Particularly, I think you see, kids who got into a fight, or maybe kids who had, like I was talking on the last episode, with like terroristic threat, right, where they made some kind of comment about hurting someone at school or doing something, and so the school felt that it was not safe for them to be at their regular campus. Cheating, I think I've seen, kids go to school, go to DAEP for that. Anything else that you've seen that particularly stands out?
Possession, bringing
possession.
drugs to campus, selling drugs on campus.
There's a lot of vaping going on campus that,
Being caught with a vape. I'm not really sure if that's something that they would go to DAEP for, but I know that if you're getting caught with a vape at school, it's a pretty big deal.
And truancy as well. So skipping school or not, just being absent a lot of times kids may end up at DAEP because it's a more controlled and structured environment.
And that's actually something I was going to add is all the teachers and all the classrooms in the DAEP are really run with more controlled and structured like behavioral principles in place. So there's very tight schedules in the classroom. There's very clear expectations. All of the kids are pretty much on some kind of behavioral plan. And they know what that plan is. And then, like I said, there's more of that open time. So there's like a space to go and do like more study hall types of things or have someone safe to go talk to or take a break. Because I think you mentioned, kids' athletics would get messed up. When someone's at DAEP, they're not allowed to really participate in their extracurricular activities. They are really just there to focus on behavior. So behavioral performance and academic performance.
So you've got a kid that excels in school, but maybe he's not getting the warmth and control at home that he needs or she needs. And in DAEP, if they're sent there and they have a stricter environment, but if maybe some more leniency. I know when I was in school, one thing I hated about class is that I could get myself in like that. I was a visual learner. I could pick it up really quick. And so half the time in class, all through grade school, I was really, really bored. So if I could just go home and just do my stuff and be done, I'd be good. So at DAEP, I just had the thought come to my brain, what if I like learning that way? I get my assignment sent over. I have this instructor that's there at DAEP, but I do just, I kind of get my stuff done and then have all this free time just to do whatever. Is that something that you may see kids like maybe continually getting involved in behavior issues to maybe want to stay in DAEP?
There's not that kind of free time, though. The teacher's going to make sure the student has something to do. They're going to give them a job. They're going to do what they can to structure their time as much as possible in that classroom.
Even if it's helping another kid.
Yeah.
If someone, like one of their classmates maybe isn't doing as well or is having a hard time learning the subject, okay, well then help out your peer.
Okay.
That's the direction.
Yeah.
So what's that movie with, where the two guys go back to school as cops? There's like 2 or 3.
With Mark Wahlberg, Jump Street.
No, it's not Mark Wahlberg, but yeah, Jump Street.
22 Jump Street.
22 Jump Street, yeah.
Who's in it? It's not
Channing Tatum.
That's
Channing
who it
Tatum,
was.
yeah. And
Can't think
Dr.
of the
Cooper
other
over there.
what's his name?
Jonas Hill.
The funny guy.
Jonah
right?
Hill?
Yeah, Jonah Hill. There
Yeah.
you go. So when they go back to school, I mean, you see like these crazy things going on in school, right? There's this secret drug and it's labeled, it's sold inside the school. There's a teacher involved. I know this is a movie and whatnot, but I think it's important for parents to kind of understand that there's a lot of stuff that goes on in schools. I mean, there's real life exposure that's happening more and more these days. I mean, you hear more and more stories about kids overdosing and things happening. And so you talked about communication with the kids. I guess what I didn't touch base on last episode that I really want to kind of dive into more this episode is, all right, well, communicate with your kids and just, having that open relationship with them. For many, many parents, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to be non-judging in some ways. And it's also very difficult to not have big reactions when you hear or see things, even if you're like going through phone checks. I mean, one thing we talked about in one episode was do your phone check in a private area so that your kids can't see your reactions to some things that you may find if you haven't been doing it for a while. So how do we, if we do not have that open relationship with our kids, communicating well, how do we as parents start to establish that, even if it's with our kids who are already in high school?
I would say first to set the intention with your kid. Kids are really smart. They can feel out when there's something going on. And they may not know exactly what it is, but they can sense it. So I think, just initially talk to your child, hey, I want to have a more positive relationship. I want to talk to you more. I want to know about your day-to-day because I love you. I'm interested in you. Like I'm just so interested in what you do. So I think initially just kind of setting that intention with your child and making sure that they understand you're coming from a place of love. You're not trying to come down all hard on them and, be the bad, like the mean parent, that it's from this place that you care about them.
Yeah, right, Mom. You just want to control me.
I want to add to that too, because that, like setting up the framework, setting that intention, giving your child an understanding of like what your purpose behind that is. I love you. I want to know about you. I'm interested in you. That's absolutely the first step. And then after that, I want to add is that sometimes it's not just talking, right? Because if you haven't really been talking to your child, or if there is some tension in the relationship already, and now the kid is like, yeah, right, you just want to control me. Like, why am I going to share anything with you? A lot of times it doesn't start with talking. It starts with just being present. And so I actually talk to families a lot about, like, do you spend just like special time with your child? Do you ever just enter their world and not talk, but just watch, just learn about them, not putting any pressure on them, not interrogating them or interviewing them about their day or, because that can become very draining, annoying, frustrating for kids when they feel like you're just trying to control me, right?
Those video games will ruin your brain.
Right. So have you actually ever just sat with them and played a video game with them, or just watched them play that game to see why they like it so much? Have you taken like that true interest in just observing them and learning about them from like a very curious standpoint? Because sometimes those times together, even if it's just 20 minutes a week, can make such a big difference for your kid of just getting used to you being there without putting all this pressure on them and talking to them all the time.
And I think it also somewhat changes how you observe your own child, and what you notice from their behaviors. Like one thing that I like that you often bring up when we talk about things at the clinic is, when the parent makes comments about what the child's doing, right? So if this is a kid who typically has attentional issues, like, kind of classic ADHD things, but they're able to focus so well on this game, you're pointing that out to them and really loving that about them.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I love how much you pay attention. I love how detailed you are and how you know how to push all the right buttons. I think those are specific examples that you've given before.
Yeah.
And I think that changes the way that you see your own child and see their strengths.
Seeing their strengths and letting them know you see that part of them. That's very healing for kids is, oh, mom or dad actually notice me, or they're giving me feedback on something that's positive. Now, one thing I do like to tell parents all the time is even if you don't have a relationship characterized by tension and stress, this happens with most kids, is if you sit there and comment on their positive characteristics or their strengths, they'll usually act like they don't hear you saying it. So I promise you, though, they absorb it, they heard you, it sinks in, but they won't even flinch sometimes.
Kids are clever, man. Mm-hmm. They are very clever. Well, and the time, that you guys are mentioning about spending with your kids, it's kind of funny. Like, last episode we talked about spring breaks. I'm going to bring it up again. But it's so funny because we're in this small hotel room, and we've got 4 kids in there. And we had a couple of rooms combined, but it's still a very small space, very, very tight. You can hear everyone. So if one kid's complaining or crying or something's going on, everyone's affected by it. But just that closeness, kids absolutely love that, of all ages, and it builds such a great bond. And so it just makes me realize that we've got to do more of that at our actual home, because when we were leaving, our 3-year-old did not want to leave. He wanted to stay at our White House because I guess the rooms were all white and whatnot. He wanted to stay at our White House. He did not want to come home. And the whole way home, he's like, I want to go back to the White House. After we got home, we got all this other space. He has all this toys here, all these things to do and whatnot. He wanted to go back. He does not want to be at home. He wants to be at the White House. It's not because the hotel room was so awesome for him with slides and everything else in the room. No, because it didn't happen. It was because we were all together, and you can just tell.
Yeah.
Makes a big difference. So when we have kids that go to DAEP or JJAEP, I'm getting good with these acronyms. It could happen to any kid, right? So kids make dumb mistakes. There's so much peer pressure that goes on. There's a couple things that I kind of want to touch base on. I know I'm kind of going back and forth, but a lot of things that kids do can be behavioral, and because they're seeking attention or whatnot, for some reason, or it could be because of trauma or other things you guys have spoken about. And there are some things also, it's usually for a reason, right? So it's usually behavioral for some reason for the most part, especially in adolescence. So when our kids maybe make a mistake or do something, or they give in to peer pressure or make a mistake and they're going to DAEP or now they're diagnosed delinquent or whatever not, how can we really support our kids the best way possible to promote success, getting through that next step, that struggle they're going to have to go through now in a different setting, to make sure that we can ensure continued success moving forward?
Do you want me to answer that?
Go ahead.
I think first just outlining for them the reason why this is happening, right? So, unfortunately, you made a mistake, and sometimes mistakes come with consequences. This is the consequence, but you can learn from this mistake. You can do so much better and actually take so much from this experience. And so if you need to go to DAP for 10 days or 30 days, whatever it might be, what can we learn while we're there? What are things that you want to set up that are different? Things that when you come back to the regular campus that you want to make a priority rather than the things that you were focused on, right? So using it as a teaching tool, as consequences come in life, and they're not fun sometimes, but we can grow from them and we can learn.
Okay. And then us as parents, we may have other parents that may know or find out and whatnot, and there's always that embarrassment potentially, or our desire to lash back out. look at your kid, your kid's no saying or whatever else. What do we do as parents? Because I know it can be tough. We always try to put that best foot forward. We've got Facebook. It shows all the great things that our family does, but never any of the negative. What do we do as parents to really kind of model how to approach even other parents that may say something?
It really depends on what kind of parent or model you want to be out there, If you can lead by taking it all in stride and you're okay with talking about it and being open about it, I mean, that's one perspective. But if you don't really want to have to answer questions and you're not open to that, it's also okay to have boundaries around that and just say, our family's going through something right now and we're not willing to speak about it. I'm just here to support my child. Great news is they're doing fine and we're going to move forward from this.
Okay. So my kids got some issues. They're in DAEP and I want them to get help. I think they need some help. What's the first step in doing that?
You mean like psychological mental health help?
Definitely some help.
What do you think, Dr. Cooper?
Well, and since you said that way, a lot of times parents are like, well, my kid doesn't need psychological help. They don't need mental help. I mean, that has a stigma to me when I hear that. And my kid just needs someone to talk to. I mean, and how do we approach it with our kids, too, to present it in the proper way? Because if I tell my kid, you need some psychological help, that doesn't sound very good, right?
Yeah, and I think presenting it as this is just someone to talk to. Like, this is a safer space for you to be able to talk about what you want to talk about with someone who is not me as the parent, right? And they're not going to tell me things as the parent that maybe you want to keep more private, as long as it's not a safety concern. And so just really emphasizing that this is some time they get to spend by themselves to just talk out things that bother them, things they want to change, even annoying things about me that they don't like. That's okay. Just being open with that.
Okay.
And, I have found these days, it's actually pretty trendy to have a therapist. And so kids kind of tell their friends that I have a therapist or I go to therapy. And so if you approach your child with, hey, would you like someone to talk to? I have actually seen most of the time kids will be like, yeah, I'll do it. So, I know this person and that person who does it too, and I'll try it out.
And there's actually oftentimes when I am meeting with teenagers at our clinic, oftentimes they're the ones who asked for it. They went to their parent and said, I need a therapist. Please get me one.
Yes.
Right?
There's much more awareness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like that commercial, got milk, got a therapist?
Yeah, seriously.
I know, I'm a dork, but
commercial.
it's okay. All right. So what else do you guys want to talk about for DAEP or JJAEP? I know we didn't go into that really much yet. So what is JJAEP anyway?
Sure. So AEP stands for the same thing, Alternative Education Program, and JJ stands for Juvenile Justice. So specifically JJAEP, or JJ as I'll call it because it's a little bit easier, is a program that's designed very similarly to DAEP, but it is done for kids who are involved in the justice system. Typically, they are already on probation at that point. And so in the county that I worked in, at a juvenile probation department, we had kids come from all over the county to attend our JJAEP. So oftentimes these are kids who they're on probation, on juvenile probation, and they have also been expelled from school or out of school suspension. So they have to attend some sort of alternative education program. Sometimes the juvenile probation department would just have them go straight to their district's DAEP, or they would have them come to JJ as a way of instituting more control and just having them in that environment. I think one of the big differences between JJ and regular DAEP is that a lot of the staff there were trained more like juvenile probation officers or juvenile detention officers. There's an even, I think, higher level of control there. They have to wear uniforms. I don't know if that's something that, yeah. So that's a big difference is they had to wear uniforms, come to school in those uniforms. They needed to be maintained well, groomed well, and if not, they lost points. And so, however many points you lose per day means a certain thing. I can't really recall exactly what it was, but you wanted to earn a certain number of points over a certain period of time in order to be able to go back to your regular campus. And the JJAEP was actually right next door to the juvenile probation department. as well as juvenile detention. So if anything happened while they were at JJ, where there was a big issue, their juvenile probation officer could come straight over, have a talk with them. They could also have better access to them in terms of things like drug testing, or if they need to check in with them. And I was able to conduct assessments, like you had mentioned earlier, with kids who were there, so that I could go straight there. Their parent wouldn't need to bring them in on a different day in order to have that happen. So all of that was really designed to try and increase the level of control that the school had, make sure that they were in class doing what they needed to do, but also serving as a place where if the kid was having a behavioral problem, it could be corrected a little bit easier because we had other kinds of staff there. We had therapists there that they could talk to. So it really was able to kind of integrate it into the juvenile probation department as a whole.
Wow. So at JJ, were the kids all in juvie, or maybe not so, maybe staying at home and just on probation?
Right. So these are all kids who are at home but on probation. Okay. So the juvenile detention facility is where the kids are actually held overnight, and they have their own school. So they do not leave the detention facility there.
Oh, I got you.
Especially kids who already are experiencing a lot of behavioral difficulties, enough behavioral difficulties that they were on probation in the first place. And so it was stressful. It's stressful for the staff there and for the other kids there. So it's not, it's not like a fix-all kind of problem or solution. Rather, it's something that is still going to take some time. They're there for a while, and a lot of the kids who do go there received DAEP sentences for quite a while, like half a year or the entire year. So it's not just like an in-out, 10-day, 2-week kind of thing, right?
Okay. And the question I was going to ask is, so kids that get involved in DAEP or JJAP, what does it look like for them? Even at DAEP on a different level, what does it look like when they go back to school? I mean, what do you're a school psychologist by training, so what do teachers look at them as? Is there a stigma now? Is there a label? Is there these things these kids are personified as when they go back to school?
That's a great question. I mean, and I kind of touched on this last episode too. They can be kind of lost in the system sometimes as socially maladjusted, and if a child gets that kind of reputation, I guess it's more like, well, there's not much we can do. This is just typical of how they've adjusted, and how they are. Other times, the reason why the school psychologist will get involved is so that an assessment can occur while they're at the DAEP, and that services can then be set up because we can find the emotional disturbance, right? That's actually the term that they would use in the school system. So maybe the child is highly anxious or does have some trauma or some kind of emotional issue that's happening. Because of that, they're able to qualify for services. A lot of times when kids reintegrate into the general school campus, they may already have services waiting for them because of that assessment. And so they're able to go into a setting that will accommodate them. They might have a behavioral plan that doesn't penalize them every single time they make a mistake, but it's more of, let's accommodate the child. Let's understand that this is actually coming from a certain emotional disturbance or other kind of classification in the special ed system. So that behavioral support is an option, and that's like the best case scenario for a lot of the kiddos that go into the DAEP. For first time or one time offenders only, I mean, one example that's actually coming to mind is a senior in high school who came to me because the mom was adamant about getting her off the hook. What she ended up doing was stealing somebody's password. It was like a school personnel's password, hacking into the school system and sending an email appearing as if she were the teacher to somebody else when it was really her the whole time. It was some crazy cyber hack that she did, right? And when asked about it, the student was like, biggest mistake ever. If I could go back, I would change it. I can't believe I did that. But it ended up that she would have to go to DAEP for that. She was going to miss prom. She was going to not be able to participate in all of her sports anymore. I mean, senior year was pretty messed up at that point. And so they come to me as an outside provider at this point. I'm not in the school system now. I'm in private practice doing my own thing for an assessment. And mom just wants me to like write letter after letter saying like, she's remorseful. This happened on accident. Don't ruin her senior year. Don't make her go through this. That kind of kid is not going to be set up for services afterwards. You know, that child doesn't really need special education services, doesn't need any behavioral plan in place. It was just like that one-time thing that happened. It was a screw up and she has to deal with the consequences of it, right? So it really also depends on the situation, but when possible, if services are needed, the school psych staff will do what they can to set the kid up to have those services.
Okay. So how many times do we think, and this is kind of a really vague question with no really exact answer without the actual data, but, you know, if you could give me a good guesstimate, percentage-wise, how many kids at DAEP or even JJAEP are there more from behavioral perspectives than like this one-time scenario type of thing?
I have no idea. What do you think?
Is it like a much greater percentage, obviously, behavioral?
Like a chronic thing, you mean? More of like a...
Well, what I'm saying is that, you know, there's so many kids that are behavioral for so many reasons. I mean, they're not getting the love, support, the warmth, the control, all the things that they're needing, you know, as a kid. Even from great parents who mean very well. I mean, there's things that kids aren't getting, so they're going somewhere else to get those things. So when you have these diagnosed delinquencies, is it mostly behavioral or, you know, for the most part? Or is there maybe half and half at, you know, one-time instance versus half, you know, behavioral?
I don't know the percentage breakdown.
Yeah, I don't know the percentage. I will say for JJ, it's going to be kids who are having repeated. Behavioral difficulties because they would have already, you know, been on probation. And then the reason that their probation officer wanted them at JJ was because there were ongoing issues at school or at home. So they wanted that higher level of control. But for regular DAP, I'm not sure, you know, what that breakdown is.
Okay. I don't know. I'm sure the districts know and we could ask them.
Yeah, I was just curious because it sounds like to me like the best thing we can do for our kids, especially with DAEP, is really advocate for our kids, try to get services set up if they really need it, if it's not just a one-time, you know, instance, and just kind of move forward from there. So one thing that I want parents to really understand is that there are services that are out there. There's great psychologists, there's great therapists. NextSTEPS Worldwide is a great place for those who have access to the clinics in the Dallas-Fort Worth and San Antonio areas. But there's also like 504 plans and whatnot that can be implemented to make sure kids are getting the services they need. And even if it's during school hours, there's a lot of, you know, pushback on, you know, sports and can't miss school and these things and whatnot. But from all the things that I've learned, some of those things are actually kind of, you know, I guess fueling some of the anxiety, depression, other things that are going on with the kids. So
well, and I think honestly, next week we should do an episode on like what the difference is between 504 and special education and what that means for parents trying to navigate those services in the school system. So there's the next episode.
There you go.
There.
Well, there you have it. So tune in next week. The next episode is about 504 special education. If you miss it, we're going to come find you. You can't miss it. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.